Greetings to our Z-Files viewers and radio listeners, the radio people on WAAZ, WJSB. We are in one of the conference rooms for Okaloosa County Judge T. Patterson Maney, and it took 2 acts of retirement for us to finally get together, sir, and do this interview. This is the final Z-Files broadcast I'll be doing for WAAZ, WJSB, and I know you're going to be doing more interviews around here.
This may be the final one.
But the reason, of course, we've been wanting to get to you, there's so much of your life story, I think it'll take us 2 25-minute segments to at least touch on most of it. But you're due to retire sometime this year, I guess, as a county judge for the county?
7 weeks from now.
Okay.
So it'll be almost a full generation, 29 years. Well, 3 weeks short of 29 years.
Okay. What we're going to do, of course, is assume that many of you who are watching this or listening to it don't know much about Judge Maney. Maybe they've seen his pictures and there's been stories about him in the newspaper, particularly recently, but we want our audience, both radio and those who watch our video of this on our YouTube channel and our website, thegoodcountry.com. Let's get back to the beginning of Pat Maney, where you were born, started out in school, went to college, and we just pointed out Troy University is among the places that have had a chance to mold part of what you have become. And I think I'll mention this piece of history right now. There's a picture on the wall over my head back to the left that is a pretty important piece of history of Okaloosa County and what all happened here.
Well, people who know me, and particularly the young lawyers who practice in front of me, know that I'm very much interested in local history. And so if you go to the 3rd floor hallway of our courthouse, you'll see it's kind of a military decorated hallway with local military heroes, 2 Medal of Honor recipients who lived in Okaloosa County and that sort of thing. And I do have the Valparaiso Inn, which was very famous and an early hotel in Valparaiso, Florida. Some of the projects I hope to start once I retire are also local history related. In the north end of Okaloosa County, while Florida was still a territory, not yet a state, there was a fort named Fort Kirkland, which the Indians captured and burned, and I want to try to locate where that fort was. Also during World War II in Crestview, just south of Crestview, there was a national service camp for conscientious objectors. And I'd like to get that marked with an historical marker. And also over in Niceville, there was the first Civilian Conservation Corps camp in the state of Florida, and I'd like to get that marked. So those are projects that I have in mind. I have been successful in finding and relocating to the Fort Walton Airport, Destin Fort Walton Airport, the bell from the World War II Liberty ship USS Okaloosa. And we got that's not the royal, I got it, but the county was kind enough to display a Huey UH-1 Army helicopter in honor of our Vietnam veterans locally, and particularly one Vietnam veteran who got the Medal of Honor flying a helicopter in Vietnam. So I've tried to be involved in those sorts of things through the years.
Piece of note at a recent county commission meeting, and they were discussing the massive growth that Destin Fort Walton Beach Airport is having, that Tracy Stage and his staff have managed to really make happen recently. I can name 4 men who really are the people who are responsible for what sits here today. Teddy Roosevelt and a cousin of his named Franklin Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt signed the law that created the Choctawhatchee National Forest, and in 1940 his cousin Franklin gave it to the Department of Defense, and we know what happened to that piece of land. Then there was a guy named Perrine and a fellow named Plew. Mr. Perrine bought for $800 16,000 acres of timberland from Cinco Briar Bridge around to the Rocky Bayou Bridge area, built that inn right there, built the town of Valparaiso, passed away rather early in life, and his estate was bought by a fellow from Chicago named Plew, who grew up in a little 5,000 population, it's only about 5,000, some county out toward Iowa, and but had become an entrepreneur in the commercial laundry business in Chicago, and connected to all the hotels and other folks up there in that kind of business. But he and a fellow named Augustus Chanute and a fellow named Cyrus McCormick formed the Chicago Flying Club, and they had the first Curtiss biplane, and they had a little practice field or flying field just south of where then Midway Airport finally got built. And of course, Mr. Plew bought the Perrine estate for 20-something thousand cash and took over the debt, and he brought his Curtiss plane down, built a runway grass strip, which I would believe that base of where that little grass runway is probably now somewhere part of what is now Eglin, Maine, right on the southwest corner of Valparaiso. And when his little grass strip attracted the flyers from Montgomery and Fort Rucker, and I guess he was smart enough to go from the pilots to the colonels to the generals. Next thing you knew, he donated 1,400 and something acres to the Department of Defense, and here we are.
And the rest is history.
That's right. As Paul Harvey would say. Now, let's get back to your history. Born where? Went to school where?
I was born in Lexington, Kentucky. My family were pioneers in Lexington. One of my ancestors founded Lexington in 1775, named for the Battle of Lexington, once they got word of that. Grew up, went to public school in Lexington, Kentucky, graduated from the University of Kentucky, went in the Army, got out of the Army, stayed in the reserve, went to law school in Louisville. Notwithstanding going to both schools, I'm a Kentucky Wildcat before I'm a Louisville Cardinal.
Okay.
Moved down to Florida in 1975, I had a pregnant wife and we were seeking opportunity, and we came to Fort Walton Beach, and we've been here ever since. I later got a master's degree from Troy. Okay. One of your, I don't know if they're a sponsor, but you carry their games. So
we've been with them for a while, yes, sir.
So
Troy and the Braves are our main two things, plus Crestview High School, naturally.
Oh, yes. So I've been here ever since, practiced law here for 14 years, practiced law in Louisville for a year before I moved down. Was appointed to a judicial vacancy as a county judge in 1989, and I've been fortunate to be elected continuously ever since.
Now, in the structure of judicial in Florida and in our county, as part of that, you have different titles. You have circuit judges, county judges. Some cities have municipal kind of judges.
We no longer have municipal judges in Florida. That changed with the constitutional revision in 1968, I believe. And now all judges in Florida have to be lawyers. But the court system is set up like a pyramid with the Supreme Court at the top, at the apex. Below that are 5 district courts of appeal, and they call them district courts because they're divided, but the state is divided into geographical districts. That's typically the final court of appeal, except for death cases. Below the district courts of appeal are circuit courts. We're in the First Circuit here in Northwest Florida. We go from Escambia County through Walton County. And then the 14th Circuit picks up and includes Panama City. Below the circuit courts are courts of general jurisdiction. That means those judges can do anything, can hear any kind of case. Below those, each county by state constitution has to have at least one county judge, and they have to be a resident of that county. When I started, we had 2 county judges. Now we have 3. County judges are called courts of limited jurisdiction. So we primarily hear misdemeanor criminal cases and non-criminal infractions and civil cases with an amount in controversy that's limited to $15,000.
Okay, so Florida does not have what it used to call a small claims court.
That's part of county court now. That's a section of county court.
Okay.
And those cases are limited to $5,000. Typically, there are not lawyers on each side of those cases because the amount is such that people find it hard to justify paying the attorney's fees for a case where what they can recover is so small.
So these are like some of the cases that they make TV shows out of.
Yes, sir. Right? Absolutely.
So you get some of that same.
They're fun.
They're fun.
They're fun.
the arguments over whose fence is whose or who bought what or,
Yes, sir.
okay,
Like traffic infractions, you never know what somebody's going to say.
I got you. Okay, now, so we have 3 county judges now,
Yes.
and,
One of whom is also a Troy graduate. Judge Jim Ward is a
Okay.
Troy graduate.
okay. And the name of this building as I drove up, and the parking I saw outside of here, I guess there's jury stuff going on today. And
This is jury week.
Jury week.
I had a jury trial on Monday. Judge Stone has jury trials going on too. He's a circuit judge.
Okay. The name is, I think, if I got this right, Okaloosa County Courthouse Extension Annex. It took a team of lawyers to get that name figured out?
That was I think primarily a political decision going back to determining what to do with the previous annex property in Shalimar,
Right.
where there was a reversion interest to the Meggs estate, which had made that land available to the county as long as it was the courthouse annex. So in trying to work through all that, they named this a courthouse annex extension, indicating that Shalimar would remain a courthouse annex.
Right.
And then once they got all that worked out, they settled with the Meggs estate heirs and tore that building down and put a county office building on it.
And then it's now an administrative type of
It's
building.
now an administrative building with no judicial function.
Right.
We have kind of an awkward name for this building.
And of course, in Crestview, we do have a beautiful new courthouse under construction. And those who know some of the history, of course, I do serve as a council member appointed. They'll have to replace me here come pretty soon now on the Crestview Historic Preservation Board, along with Jerry Milligan and Pat Hollern and quite a few other folks who are. They have a longer background in Crestview and Okaloosa County history than I do. I have to give credit to 2 ladies who wrote a book called Crestview of Portland.
I have a copy of that book.
And when I first came to work at WAAZ in 2003, there was a little announcement there that Claudia Garrett Patton, I guess it was. if I
Yes,
remember right.
Ms. Patton.
She was taking orders for reprinting. So I called her up and I went and did an interview and saw the first copy of the first edition. And then over the period of time, I have done interviews and stories about it. And here just a couple of years ago, Claudia said, you know, we got to have someone to do it. Roger Robinson, one of her sons, didn't want to take it on as a project. And so she wanted to give it to somebody, the city. And so finally it was given, I wrote a little agreement up that for her and Betty to sign that gave it to the Crestview Historic Preservation Board. And with that, we are now in the second. We printed 100. We called it the Centennial Edition with a new color, which showed the first courthouse and the second courthouse on the cover. And we had a few minor changes. Otherwise, it's still the same book. And by the way, folks, I've got some. Baker Block Museum has them. They're only $65. And I find people that when I talk about stuff I've learned just from that book, really, and a few other books around the area. And I talked to natives who don't know some of the history of this county.
Well, I talked to Ms. Patton when I was trying to, earlier working on locating the National Service Camp.
Right.
And she gave me the general location. It's not mentioned in the book. Ms. Patton is in her 80s, I believe, quite sharp. But she didn't know exactly where it was, so she talked to, quote, some of the girls, unquote, in her Sunday school class who used to date some of the, quote, boys, unquote, in 1941.
Okay.
And they've given me the general location of the camp.
So you're going to still be out there digging for history.
I am. I think it's important for us to know where we've come from and who's done what,
Yeah.
good and bad.
Every place has history, you know. I mean, the town I grew up in was created in the early 1800s in Illinois back, you know, and those were, you know, early pioneer days. But
Years ago when they tore down the Shalimar Courthouse Annex, I got the county to give the Bar Association some bricks. There's one. And so we presented a brick to each of the lawyers who used to practice in that building before it was torn down. And when they tore down the Crestview Courthouse, I was able to save, probably 24 bricks out of that. Interestingly, some of them are red brick, which were from the additions, in the 50s, and some of them were yellow bricks from the first courthouse.
Yes.
So it's possible to have a complete collection of bricks from the various Okaloosa courthouses, although I don't know where the Milligan, if they had a courthouse in Milligan when the county first was established.
About a month ago, J.D. Peacock and I went through the first 2 minute books of Okaloosa County out in the archives out on Old Bethel Road. The first book was all handwritten. So their first meeting was in the fall of 1915. We know that the first, and they mentioned in there, we went through and read pieces of the different dialogue as we could read the handwriting. They used a commissary, and I can't remember the name of the business that commissary was for, as their temporary meeting place. It was never called a courthouse in any of the minutes. In the second book of minutes, where they were typed, and think about this, this page is this big, typed, and you can, if you run your hand over, you feel that impression of where the keys struck that thing. And I didn't, very rarely did I see any whiteout on there or anything where they had retyped. So
I'm not sure they had whiteout in those days.
They were some very, but we did find a Saturday meeting at the end of November 1918 when they met in Crestview in a special meeting. The next minutes are December 10th, 1918, and it says meeting in their office in the courthouse in Crestview.
So that's neat.
So we know that that is the date, and so I've talked with several of the commissioners and with JD about the idea of, something needs to be done. Now that's not going to be a regular meeting date this year, and they will probably be in that new courthouse before December, most likely.
Good Lord willing.
Yeah, and so maybe something commemorative on that December 10th, which will be 100 years to the day of the first meeting in the first official courthouse. And of course, you've seen the picture of the old one. And when the commissioners were deciding in one of their meetings, the vote was taken, yes, we will tear down the 1950 building. I took a trip through there with one of your fellows in the county in the old building. And courtroom B smelled like you were walking into a 2-week-old locker room of stuff left in the floor from a football game 2 weeks ago.
Well, Commission Chairman Graham Fountain is a serious history student also, and so is Commissioner Carolyn Ketchell, so I would think they could schedule a vote on that day.
Yeah, but anyway, I know that when we were going through what was the new courthouse, and I have a set of the proposal that was done that JD gave me that was going to be kind of like concrete stuff and plastered, I don't know what it was, but it did not look like the original. But finally they did agree, and they gave the historic board the chance to kind of look at 3 different designs. And I've done this on my Z-Files videos and in the newsletter. You can look at 1918 and 2018, and you can see the style and view, except this is so much bigger a building.
Yes.
It's going to have 12 white columns, where the original only had 4 white columns. This building is 5 or 6 times probably bigger than that first one. So is the county population.
Well, the courthouse in any county, but certainly in Okaloosa County, the courthouse in Crestview really is the center of activity for all sorts of government functions.
And hopefully that we'll have some kind of a celebration when we do have the opening. We know that will occur. But in talking with Walt Ruckle Jr., who was my landlord when I ran the little radio stations in Niceville, and he taught me a lot of the history, and because I was trying to buy a piece of land for a new radio tower for that station, and he said Grandpa Plew had told us you never ever sell your commercial valuable property. And you don't build all your residential property at one time. You think about it, they're just now, and he took me, that was back in 2001, he and Jim went out and rode part of a day riding around that acreage that is just now going to be developed into a subdivision. And even when they opened up Swift Creek, one lot in there sold for multiples of what Grandpa Plew paid for the whole 16,000 acres.
Yes. Buy land when you're young.
That's right. But he had told me that Mr. Plew had 2 daughters, one married a Meigs and one married a Ruckle, and they're the steps of the history of this county and this area. Well,
Mildred Plew Ruckle was an amateur poet, and she wrote a poem called "The Pirate Don Dirk of Dowdee." I don't know if you.
No.
That was a. I learned that. I mean, I knew the poem. I knew the name of the poet when we moved here, but I'd never connected them. But when I was a child in the 50s, 40s. There was, my parents had a set of children's books called the Golden Books or something, Child Crafters, and that poem was in there, and my mother used to read it to me as a child. And then I moved here and met Clifford Megg's widow, Sarah Ferdon Trass, and they had all Mildred's draft poetry out in one of their outbuildings. So it's just an amazing place to live. It's a wonderful place to live.
Now, your attraction to come to Fort Walton, had you been stationed here during your military
No,
time at all?
no, I'm Army.
Okay, well.
My father was Air Force and then became a civil service employee. Before that, he was a electrical engineering professor at the University of Kentucky. But Mother and Dad moved down here, so we started visiting. And in those days, the first time we visited, there were 12 lawyers in the two-county area in Okaloosa, Walton County. And I was coming from the city of Louisville, where I had my first law practice, and I thought, 12 lawyers in 2 counties?
Yeah.
It's growing. I can make a living down there.
Yes, sir.
And it's been very good to
and
me.
not have to shovel snow.
And not have to shovel snow or pay state income tax.
That's true. Another good reason to be. The Taj Mahal name down the road. I don't know if you know that history of how that name came about, because everybody calls it that still, of course.
I think it was built with Water and Sewer Department, quote, enterprise funds.
Right.
And the commissioners moved into it right away.
Do you remember the name Cotton Atkinson from her county public works department?
I do not.
Okay, that goes back a good while, but as I understand from Mr. Whitaker and Jerry Milligan, who would probably well know, he was a guest on a morning show on WJSB-AM Z back at that time, and they were discussing the plans for this big new building. And somehow it got nicknamed during that broadcast, well, that looks like a Taj Mahal. And I think even some county directories list that building as the Taj Mahal.
Everybody knows it by that name.
And of course, my guest, I'm sure you recognize the voice and the name, Pat Maney, county judge about to retire in Okaloosa County. I want to talk more about the military part of what you did, because that's part of what has made you a news feature, you might say, to the people of the county. I don't let that many news people interview and want to talk about all this history stuff that you and I tend to love. But you said you went into the Army when you were young. Give us that whole military history.
Well, let me tell you a quick family story. My grandfather served in World War I. My father served in World War II. My grandfather joined the infantry. When World War II war clouds were forming on the horizon, my father was an ROTC cadet at University of Kentucky. It was a land-grant school, and in those days, every male attending a land-grant college had to do 2 years of ROTC. President Nixon changed that, but anyway. My grandfather told my father, I joined the infantry. Son, whatever you do, don't join the infantry. Dad joined the infantry. When my elder brother and I were in University of Kentucky, the war in Vietnam was ongoing, and Dad told us what our grandfather had told him, and Dad said, boys, I didn't listen to my dad. Whatever you boys do, don't join the infantry. Both of us became infantry officers. And the Army was very good to us. My elder brother and I are 20 months apart in age, and we each got a Purple Heart, and we got them 34 years apart, so 35 years apart, 34 years apart. So we both joined the infantry.
Okay.
I didn't stay in the infantry. Once I got off active duty and went to law school, I did not become a JAG officer. I became a civil affairs officer over in Pensacola, Florida. And I stayed in civil affairs. I ended up serving at different times, and as a reserve officer, I served in Panama, Haiti. I served in Bosnia for 10 or 11 months, and then I served in Afghanistan for 17 months. I got blown up. My live day, the day I got blown up, was August 21st of 2005.
Okay.
I spent almost 20 months at Walter Reed and then medically retired.
Okay. Now, what were the type of job duties you did then as that type of a person in the Army?
Oh, it was a wonderful job. Regardless of rank, the Civil Affairs Organization has a responsibility for being the interface between the maneuver commander, the combatant commander, and the civilian community. So it was a civil-military interface job. And so when I went to Haiti, I worked with the justice system. When I went to Bosnia, I actually worked initially as a special assistant and then later as acting chief of staff for an international peace organization, peace implementation organization called the Office of High Representative, which was set up by the Dayton Peace Agreement. So I worked with the Bosnian presidency. I worked with various ministers and ambassadors. It was really a high-level, fascinating international job. That's what got my interest really strong in international relations, so I went to Troy and got a master's in international relations. Turns out with that background, the Army then wanted me to go to Afghanistan to work doing interface between the State Department, the military agencies, and the Afghan government, because I could speak all three bureaucratic languages.
Okay.
So it was a fascinating, fascinating job. Amongst other things in Afghanistan, I worked on President Karzai's inaugural planning committee, worked with the Ministry of Health and the Supreme Court, and it was an exciting, challenging job for a county court judge from Okaloosa County.
Now, did some of this run concurrently with your duties
Yes.
as a judge? And
Yes.
you took leave for periods of
Yes,
time?
yes, I took military leave
Okay.
from the state of Florida. Governor Jeb Bush approved the military leave for me.
Okay. So what was happening that day that you wound up getting a ride over to Walter Reed eventually?
Afghanistan, as you may know, has a tremendous development problem, unemployment problem. And they also are an emerging modern country, so they have a shortage of potable water, drinkable water. So all of the international community, the military, the diplomats, the contractors, the various international aid agencies, they all drink imported bottled water, which is very expensive.
Oh, I imagine.
So my idea was to work with the U.S. Geological Survey people as well as the Ministry of Agriculture to find a potable water source and put in a water bottling plant to give Afghans employment and to save U.S. taxpayers money so we wouldn't have to import all this water. And we had gone up in the mountains above Kabul to a place called Pogman. That actually is a site of where the former king's summer palace was. And then we went further up in the mountains, and coming back out of the mountains, we had gotten water samples coming back out of the mountains. I was blown up with an IED. Our vehicle was essentially destroyed. The bomb, it was a command detonated bomb. Then it went off just in front of the vehicle, so the vehicle was blown up in the air. The whole hood and all that was blown off the vehicle. It was an armored vehicle, but it was blown up in the air, and of course with physics we continued the forward motion, and then we came down into the new crater, which threw the back of the vehicle up, and we continued on, and then we finally settled. So we got thrown around quite a bit.
What kind of injuries you got?
I had back injuries, a lot of dental injuries. 27 teeth were cracked or broken. But the main thing was I suffered a traumatic brain injury, a TBI. So while I could walk and talk, my cognition was seriously damaged, and I had a lot of, I had all of the classic traumatic brain injury symptoms. Light sensitivity, word finding difficulty, memory difficulty, headaches, sleep problems, all those things that cumulatively make you pretty unfit to do anything. I needed a full-time caregiver, really, and that's what my wife did.
I guess. And Afghanistan first, and then I'm going to talk more about the military and the medical care you got. Are there rivers, are there reservoirs up in those mountains that captured waterfall coming off of the mountains that was usable? Did they allow you to build dams?
There are rivers. There are not. There's only one big dam, Kajiki Dam, which was a hydroelectric dam that we built before the communist revolution that threw out the king. There are little small, like pond-type dams on various rivers. Up in the mountains, the rivers run year-round from snow runoff, but by the time they get down to places like Kabul, in the summertime, they're essentially drier. They may have a few puddles, but they're no longer flowing. So we had to go up in the mountain to find a source of water that was year-round.
So there was no way. Did they put wells in the ground out there?
They do, and in fact, the U.S. drilled a lot of wells for agricultural purposes, for irrigation. But the Afghan people are really, they have underground irrigation that is hundreds of years old that people have put in through the years, so they can water their crops and orchards. But of course, that's not necessarily potable water, and it doesn't meet current agricultural needs. Where we try to, farmers try to plant and harvest lots of acres as opposed to an acre or so plot. So a subsistence plot. So there's a lot of need for modernization.
As you look back over this whole history of what you've been part of, military-wise, civilian-wise, do we see a benefit for what we have done with the money and our people and the lives of going to places like Afghanistan, Iraq, or wherever else we are now?
Well, as far as Afghanistan, the story is not over, as you know. But it's a good day's work when you can go free 25 million, 27 million people and give them an opportunity to have their own, to determine their own future and whether they want to develop in a modern society in a traditional context. So, yeah, I think it's been worthwhile. We just need to stay the course. I mean, World War II ended in 1945, and we still have troops in Germany, and Japan, and Korea. I mean, it's kind of unrealistic to think that we can pull troops out of Iraq or Afghanistan after, we've been in Afghanistan now since 2001, so it's our longest conflict. And that's bad, and lots of people have been injured and killed. But it's still a long way from the amount of time we've been in Germany or Korea or Japan.
Right. So with the medical attention you got, I gather from Afghanistan, what they took you to Germany possibly? Is that
I
where
did
they
not go to
took you
Germany.
Okay.
Because of my status, there was kind of a bureaucratic discussion between the State Department, where I was assigned to work, and the military, because I was a military officer working at the embassy, and they both each of them kind of pointed at the other and said, it's your job to take care of him. It was never really formally resolved. I just was put on a freedom flight out of Kabul and flew through the Emirates back to Washington, D.C. on a freedom flight. And then I was at Walter Reed for, like I say, 1 week short of 20 months.
So you've seen, now does Walter Reed part of the VA hospital complex?
No, Walter Reed Army Medical Center in those days was a separate Army installation in Washington. It's now part of the National Naval Medical Center at Bethesda, which was only like 12 miles away. In those days, they closed the old Walter Reed. But it's a Department of Defense facility. It is not a VA facility. Although I have a lot of contact now with the VA, I did not in those days.
Is the VA fixable? Can an admiral run the VA? No, my impression is an admiral has a lot of management experience. People don't believe you get that far, but without having some of that.
I think the VA is spread pretty thin, and I think has many fine employees, but it's also a very sclerotic bureaucracy that isn't always focused on the veteran. It's sometimes focused on the bureaucracy rather than on serving the reason for their existence. Locally, we have a very good VA clinic in Okaloosa County, and we're fortunate to have a vet center, which is a part of the readjustment counseling service of VA. They don't do any medical prescriptions and that sort of thing at the vet center, separate from the vet clinic, but they offer counseling for combat veterans. It's a wonderful facility.
Well, from the injuries you described and the condition you were in from that incident in Afghanistan, what they've been at Walter Reed and your recovery from that has probably been pretty amazing to some people's viewpoint, and probably your own.
It's been a real blessing. Part of the good and part of the bad is I was not fit for military duty and was medically retired, but the thing that really got me over the hump and able to come back to work was a local Okaloosa County physician, Dr. Eddie Zant, Z-A-N-T, who has a hyperbaric oxygen practice.
Okay.
And he had suggested, and the Army was nice enough to send me to George Washington University Hospital for hyperbaric oxygen treatment, and that's what allowed me for my brain to heal, as opposed to being on medication for the rest of my life.
Wow.
The bad side of all that is neither the DOD nor the VA has made hyperbaric oxygen widely available to the current wounded warriors. And that's really a shame, because it works.
Have you been talking to some of the congressmen?
I have.
Over and over, probably?
I have. Senator Don Gates, when he was Senate President, helped us with that in the state of Florida, with the University of South Florida. But it's still an uphill battle with the big VA and with the big DOD. The Israelis use it, incidentally.
Okay.
In fact, there was a professional peer-reviewed journal that an Israeli article of about a year ago criticizing the U.S. literature and how they hadn't done good studies here in this country to show its effectiveness.
So what's next on your calendar after these final weeks of being the judge are over?
I'm going to work on locating Fort Kirkland and the National Service Camp in Crestview, and getting a marker for the CCC camp in Niceville. And I'm going to work on family genealogy for a while. I'm also very interested in education. When I was in the Army, one of the things I did was I was the deputy commandant of the JFK Special Warfare Center and School, training Green Berets, civil affairs, and psychological operations soldiers. I may try to substitute teach here in Okaloosa County. I love history, and I have previously taught both for University of West Florida and at that time Okaloosa Walton College, now Northwest Florida State. And I enjoy teaching, and I kind of like maybe to look into those things, or maybe sub in the high schools or something.
Gee, I could see your name on the ballot in future years for a school board or something like that.
Well, I don't know. We'll cross the political bridge when we get to it.
It depends on how many things are on that honey-do list that's waiting at your house.
That's exactly right, and we haven't had that discussion yet. I want to get retired and have a chance to decompress before I attack those things.
Okay. Well, as we look at the crowd that's out in the parking lot here as I came in today, then I realized when somebody came out and the young lady was wearing a sort of a short skirt, and they said, "I'm not fit for being," they kicked her out. I said, well, I got kicked out because I'm too old. You know, when you're over 70, when you're approaching 80, like me, they say, well, you don't have to sit through those things.
You don't have to.
But you might want to.
But you might want to, and
Yeah.
it certainly is a community service. I think there are three ways citizens can serve. One is to serve in the armed forces and protect the country. One is to vote and elect our leaders. And one is to serve on juries and resolve disputes between our citizens or between the citizens and the government. So it's really an important service.
Right. One of the things you get to do, and where we see each other several times every couple of years, is working with the elections that we have.
I've been very fortunate. I've been very fortunate throughout my career. I've had experiences that I never would have imagined. I was involved, as you may remember, with Bush versus Gore, the election of 2000 and the recount. I never would have imagined that.
Yeah.
I met the king of Afghanistan twice. I got an award from him one time. I met Pope John Paul II in Bosnia. I ran the security for his visit to Sarajevo in 1997. I never thought I'd meet a pope or a king. As a youth, I had met Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. I mean, what small town southern boy would ever conceive of those kinds of experiences?
Right.
And I've met just thousands of really good folks here in Okaloosa County. And hopefully I've been able to help some of them as they go through difficult times. To the extent that I've made mistakes, and we all make mistakes, I hope people realize that they were mistakes of the head and not the heart, because I've always tried to, serve humbly.
Right. Well, sir, we appreciate your time. Thank you for finally getting to do this visit.
It's been great working with you through the years, up at the elections mainly, but
Right.
I've enjoyed it, and I look forward and wish you the best out in Panama City.
I know one thing I didn't get to cover much of, the story of the bill. And the
bill.
book, the Okaloosa, because I know the bill is now on display. So some people may walk through that part of the park, kind of like a garden lawn area out in front of the airport. But when did you find out about the ship and the bill, and what all was involved in getting that here?
Well, there were two things. First, I was talking with Paul Lux, the Okaloosa County Supervisor of Elections, and Paul told me he had seen a reference to the bell from the USS Okaloosa. My wife was out of town shortly thereafter, and I started plinking around late at night on the computer rather than going to bed. And I, based on the information Paul had given me, I was able to find a reference to the bell over on the east side of Mobile Bay in Baldwin County. I worked with Congressman Jeff Miller, and we got Baldwin County to give Okaloosa County that bell, and we got Jeff Miller was able to get the Navy to give Baldwin County a substitute bell, so we got the bell back here. So that was fun, and this experience, I mean, it was a hard experience getting blown up. I had a good time in Afghanistan, but getting blown up was not a real positive highlight.
No.
But the result of that was when I came home, I built upon my experience as a soldier and my experience before that starting the first mental health court up here in Okaloosa County. And we started the Veterans Treatment Court to address the justice needs of justice-involved veterans. And that turned out to be a wonderful experience. I'm still presiding over that and will for another 3 sessions. But the legislature was nice enough to name the bill after me statewide, so we have the Patterson Maney Veterans Treatment Court bill is state law here in Florida. And we now have 35 veterans courts in the state with 67 counties, so we need to keep expanding to serve the veterans in every county of the state. That's also important to lower the jail population and increase liberty for our people.
And that's our Z-Files for this day, this week. And as we approach getting close to 400 of these broadcasts we've done since we began with CBC TV back around, I think it was, 10 years ago almost. That's it for now. Now back to WAAZ, WJSB, and the Good Country.